What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch. I'm Cameron English. That's Dr. Chuck Dinerstein. I was commenting to Chuck that it looks like I'm shooting a hostage video in the hotel bathroom, and that's because that's exactly where I am. I'm not a hostage unless you count my children as terrorists, which is actually not wrong, as Chuck can attest.
Not that far from the truth. No.
Yeah. If you ever want to be embarrassed, take your kids to breakfast at a hotel. Any hotel will do where they serve breakfast. It's a good time. Nevertheless, we've got an article to discuss, as we always do. This is by Dr. Dinerstein himself. This is called Peptides, Patient Autonomy, and the Limits of Medical Freedom. Let me read the summary here, Chuck. And this is interesting because you're actually responding to somebody, which you don't always do. You're a pretty congenial guy. You let people say what they're going to say. But I think this got you worked up a little bit. So let's dive in here. So you say John Stossel, who, by the way, is a libertarian political commentator, talk show host, used to be an investigative reporter or consumer advocate reporter, something like that, whatever the official title is, investigating defunct toasters and such devices.
All around good guy.
Yeah. Seems nice enough. But in any case, you say John Stossel's case for medical freedom is emotionally and philosophically powerful. If we own our bodies, why should the government decide what risks we may take with them? But peptides expose the weak joint in that argument. The issue is not simply whether a competent adult may consent to risk. It is whether the consent can sanitize a market built on uncertain ingredients, evasive labeling, distorted claims, and sellers who profit while disclaiming responsibility. Okay, so walk us through this, Chuck. I think this is a really interesting argument because instead of hitting back and saying, consumers don't know how to make decisions, they're too stupid, or they need someone to protect them, you're actually putting the onus on the manufacturer, whomever that may be in China or Malaysia, wherever they are. And you're saying, well, you have some responsibility too. It's not just on the consumer.
Yes. Well, that's true. It's true. See, this is the reason that I responded to John Stossel's article is because as a surgeon, I have wrestled with the concept of informed consent for all of my clinical lifetime. And the consent part of that phrase is pretty straightforward. You get a signature at the end. The difficulty always lies with the first part of the phrase, which is informed. And I think that this is where the whole medical freedom issue comes down. I don't, if you want to go and experiment and do this or that, have at it. The caveat would be that if we're experimenting with things that are communicable to others, maybe your responsibilities extend beyond your own personal liberty. But we can set that aside for the moment. But what's happened with the GLPs, and that, which are, by the way, the P in GLP stands for peptide, is that there's a range of these very powerful chemical signals that can do a variety of things, and that there's been testing on them in terms of their toxicology or their efficacy in animals. But there's very little in the way of human data, and people are in a rush to get to use them because it'll let them live longer or give them bigger muscles or whatever the peptide du jour might be. And they don't want to wait to go through all these things. And so it really gets down to that old argument, my body, my choice. And I think that there's some validity to that argument. And that's what John Stossel, I think, is basically arguing in that. And what most of the people that talk about medical freedom talk about. But it leaves out the part about making an informed decision. And in this particular gray area, the manufacturers are not being held to any standards, let alone FDA standards. And as a result, a lot of winking and nodding going on. The best example of the wink and nod is that they advertise these peptides on the internet for research purposes. Yes, in air quotes. I should have, for research purposes. Knowing full well that the research is going to be done on the person that's receiving the package. But they feel that that gets them off the liability hook. As an aside, just to aggravate other people, this is very much the same thing that the people that are selling raw milk do when they advertise that it's only for pets. And it turns out the pet is actually the purchaser of it. Because aren't we all somebody's pet?
I was about to say, right? I'm sure someone is somebody's pet, and that's why that's what they really meant.
Yes, I mean, it's not necessary to wear the dog collar, but you can still be the dog.
Not my kind of party. Anyways, so yeah, keep going.
The other thing I did is I traced for a moment the legal definition of informed consent, and that's been a bifurcated phrase for a long time. Consent was the first part, because the first thing they did is they wanted to stop doctors from assaulting patients by doing things that they just wanted to do to see how things would go. And so that's where the word consent came into it. It was later on when we turned to treating people with various degrees of retardation by sterilizing them that the word informed came into the discussion, and from a legal point of view. And then it's come down to today. You can see this fight going on, dare I say, in the world of gender medicine, because the age of majority is generally 18 to 21. Many of the children that are affected by some kind of gender dysphoria that are being asked to opine on what they want are at an age when they are not considered capable of making an adult decision. And that's where the informed part comes. For a less controversial version, you can look at any of the day-to-day interactions that I had with my patients or that we have with your doctor. Do you truly get an informed consent? Do you understand the risks? And what the legal system says is that you need to be aware of the important markers in making the decision so that it's informed. But that's a legal nicety, because it becomes a weighting of factors. What's important to you may not be as important to me. We certainly see that with the GLP-1s. You see that now with this whole conversation about the peptides. It's very important to me that my mitochondria get fed. And so I put less weight on the fact that there's no evidence that it works. I want to give it a whirl.
I think the part of Stossel's argument that I found the least compelling is that he doesn't deal with any of the material facts of the situation. Like, for one thing, and someone else pointed this out to both of us, I think, is that peptide is a very broad class, right? So to say that people have a right to use peptides, you're talking about so many varying drugs and what they do and how they work and how your body responds to them. It's kind of like saying you have a right to use any and all antibiotics, right? It's not a coherent sentence in that sense. But as a libertarian, he doesn't really care about any of that. Like his ultimate thing, and it is almost religious, frankly, is it's this belief in this abstract sense of individual autonomy. And because of that is the highest goal, it doesn't, like, you could say, well, people are going to inject this in themselves and have seizures. And he'll be like, well, but my body might, in other words,
yes,
there's nothing that could dissuade people who think that that's compelling. What do you think about that?
I think it's true. I think that, I posit this as a risk-benefit weight analysis, but there's no reason to argue that that's not, in fact, what we're seeing is that people have very strongly held beliefs which override any other considerations. What I think is equally true about what John Stossel is talking about is that it's far more. He deals in a far more abstracted world in this discussion than I did on a day-to-day basis, getting consent for surgical or medical care. And I think that makes a difference. So I pulled up a quote by a very famous philosopher on this topic, Yogi Berra. And he wrote, "In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is."
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, Yogi's right in there with important ideas. And I think that really gets down to why these conversations that are very abstracted and put into the internet that way begin to fall apart when the rubber meets the road and you actually have to not so much give a consent. That's pretty easy, or it's easier. It's getting a consent and living with the consequences of having gotten that consent. So I'll play the doctor card, I guess, on that one. That, if you get someone to consent and things go awry, there's a lot of recriminations in there. And part of the recriminations the physician may have is, did I really explain things well? Did I really discuss the risks? That kind of thing. On the other hand, the patients are saying, you didn't actually discuss the risks, and I'll see you in court and we'll discuss it there.
Right. That's a very good point. I heard one person say, this is a libertarian of all people, back in the day, he said, if something works in theory, then it works in practice. Because that's the definition of something that works in theory. It's something that works. So I find that kind of frustrating. And it's the same thing with the drug legalization folks, where, and Soslow actually made this argument. He said, they're going to do it no matter what. And so, as all sensible parents know, that's the answer then, is to let them do what they want, because they're going to do it anyway.
Yes. I see how being a parent now has begun to influence your political thinking.
Fundamentally, and yes, I am comparing most adults to my children, because
why not?
But in other words, there's the important point is that you unleash a market like this. You let people make these kind of decisions, and the consequences fall primarily on them. And then we go, well, smell the freedom, and I don't know that that's compelling to me anymore.
Okay, well, and I would argue that it's a little bit vision blinded to say that the consequences fall entirely upon them, because oftentimes there's family.
There are other consequences. I just mean, like, if you inject whatever, like research grade Botox, right? You're gonna feel the biggest impact of that, even if other people have to pay for your 6 months of, you know what I mean?
Of looking strange. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I got. Yeah, I see that. But again, as I said, I think that's part of the underlying assumption. But they say, well, that's not really the case. I mean, you can see that with the opioid situation. What you hear primarily from the survivors and the survivors' families, in terms of the ill effects of the opioid epidemic. So, and again, and that whole idea of, well, if it just affects me, it's okay, but if it affects other people, it's more problematic, is what we see when we start talking about vaccines and any other public health measure in areas of any communicable disease. So that's that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'll make just one final observation as we wrap up here. I rarely hear people defend that claim that they own themselves. I think people take it as self-evident that it's true, and therefore they don't feel they have to explain it to you. But I actually don't think that's true. And if you go to people on one of these topics online and say, well, explain it, how do you know that you own yourself? Like, who are you? Like, do the freshman philosophy professor thing on them and just see what they say. And most people don't know because they haven't thought about it. They've just been told by someone that if you want to do something, you get to do it because you get to do it because everyone knows that's the truth. And
Right.
I don't
Well,
think that's
yes.
defensible. I think there are certain things you have rights to, but you can make a logical case for why that is. It's not, well, because I'm me. What do you think as we close here?
Well, that gets down to your divine rights, where they came from, and I think it's fair to argue that um, if you're claiming something to be a right that's not already explicitly granted, you should be able to show why that's actually is derived from a right that we already have, or that we've all there's a consensus that we've agreed to that right. And I think we'll see how the peptides play out. I think that what we're going to see is that all of the things that we just discussed today in theory are very interesting, and then it's going to be the lobbyists that are going to make the decisions with the FDA about which ones are released in the next 2 or 3 months.
I feel like you're suggesting that the public doesn't have a ton of influence over a question like this, but you couldn't be saying that, could you?
No, I mean the public has a huge influence because they brought the topic back up and they put it on the table.
And then the other people get
And,
to choose from the table.
and now the people with the money and the leverage to push the decision will be in the room.
Very good.
Other stakeholders, they're
Everyone's
stakeholders.
a stakeholder, baby. We all got stakes to hold. I feel it. I feel it. Okay.
Some people have stakes that are lit on fire, others are not.
Some people like their steaks medium. Other people like them burnt, and that's stupid. See, anyways, that was a dad joke. Okay. The article is called Peptides, Patient Autonomy, and the Limits of Medical Freedom. That is at acsh.org. While you're there, go to the subscribe tab, punch in your email address. We'll send you the stories that we write. The ones you read are usually the ones we talk about. And if you're enjoying our work, you can click that donate button and give us $5. Help us keep the lights on. Help us pay our brilliant experts like Chuck so we can keep putting out this content. And with that, thank you so much. We will see you next time.